we're talking about jurisprudence and the sources of law. Where does all law come from? Does it come from our reason? Does it come from some sort of collective decision making? Does it come from holy books? Does it come from leaders? Does it come from kings? Does it come from God? And how do we integrate all of this into a system with sufficient pillars of law to bulwark our societies, our communities, to give them maximum legal force? So the foundations of law, there has to be authority whence issues law. Now, in Islam, the system of law is called Sharia, and it's got a long history. It goes back to, it's got a long history. It goes back hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 years or so, to its great legal scholars like Ibn Shafi, who elaborated 4 principles of law that the Sharia consisted of, 4 sources of the law. Like, one was the Quran, the revelation that Allah made to Muhammad. So within that holy scripture, you can find laws, how human beings should act in relation to each other. And so that was one source of the law. Another source is called the Sunnah, and that essentially is the words and deeds of the Prophet Muhammad. So the founder of the religion is regarded as a kind of ideal figure. And to Muslims, he's an ideal figure. So what he says and what has been recorded of his sayings in the hadith can become a source of law. And what he has done, which again is a matter of recorded history, but sometimes there's legend mixed in with it, becomes a source of law as well. Because if the Prophet said this and the Prophet acted in this way, then we can derive certain principles that we can apply to ourselves today for thinking and acting. Yeah? So that's the second source of law. And the third source of law was called, was to do with the consensus of the community, the Ummah. I think the Prophet Muhammad said that my community as a whole will never condone error or subscribe to error. What he meant by that, presumably, is that there might be error in this individual or that individual, but when the whole community comes together to deliberate what is right and wrong, they get it right. And then the fourth source of law was to do with reasoning, using philosophical reasoning. So individuals were capable of being themselves a source of law.
That's what I was about to say.
Mm-hmm. So when you take the 4 together, you've got 4 pillars of law in Sharia. Whether you like Sharia or not, whether you object to it or not, whether you look at the Prophet Muhammad as a role model or not, it's quite an elaborate system.
Putting all that aside, I think it's an individual thing. You can come to that conclusion yourself.
Well, Sharia and most systems of law
Yeah.
give a place for, especially natural law in the West, give a place for the individual's own reasoning to correct principles of justice and law. Absolutely. It's something that we've all got in common. It's a really important pillar of law. Now, you can take this sort of fourfold structure and transpose it to the Christian tradition as well. You can say, well, okay, there's the Quran over here. The Christians have a holy book too. It's called the Bible. So maybe the Bible can be a source of law. And I think most Christians would agree that the Bible is a source of law.
But it goes back to the fact that it doesn't encourage people to think.
I know,
It's
but...
like, rely on this, we will work it all out for you and just follow it.
Okay, but you know that, let's say in the Bible, there's the 10 Commandments recorded. Now, the 10 Commandments have been a basis of legal codes, and they've provided a guidance and a structure for people down through the ages. And it comes from the Bible, and it was revelation. So this first source of law has to do with revelation, not something that man has thought through himself. Now, maybe you could think through.
Thou shalt not steal. Of course you don't steal. I mean, that's...
But here's the thing, Belinda, how much you say, of course we could get to that, but if it weren't told you and taught to you in the first place, it wasn't there in the back of your mind, you know, you learned it at school or Sunday school or church or whatever, or read it in the Bible, life experience, but you've already been primed with you've heard the 10 Commandments before. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt honour thy parents. It's like, oh God, we're meant to be doing this. So revelation can be a source of law. It is a source of law for a lot of people, even if it isn't for you, even if it isn't for a lot of people. Over history, if we look at the big picture, revelation has been a source of law for Christians and Muslims. And then if you look at the analogue of the Sunnah, you know, the words and deeds of the Prophet Muhammad, well, the figure of Jesus Christ, for Christians, let's say, is ideal, exemplary, paradigmatic. So Christians can look at what Jesus did, the sacrifices he made, how he treated the poor and the sick and the ignorant, and build a system of action on that. They can also hear his words, his teachings, like the Sermon on the Mount. Oh, blessed are the poor, blessed are the peacemakers, and so on. What does all that mean? And by contemplating the words and deeds of the founder of the religion, you've got another source of law. Now, Jews can do this for their religion too, because they might look at Moses, who was a lawgiver. So they do derive a lot of law, not just from the 10 Commandments, but from all the other laws, the 1613 mitzvot, that came or were derived from the Torah. And the Torah was revealed by God to man. You know, man in his struggle is trying to work out what's going on, and then God reveals his law to Moses on Mount Sinai. So Moses is both the conduit of the revelation and a lawgiver, and maybe, he is a prophetic example to look to. Like, one can ask oneself, what did Moses do? What would Moshe have done in this situation? What did he say when he was faced with this problem, when he had to adjudicate a certain problem? What kind of principles did he use to adjudicate that problem? And so religious adherents can turn to the figure of their religious founder. What would Buddha have done in this situation? They can turn to the figure of the founder, look at their words and deeds as a possible source of law. Now, the third pillar of the law is this one of communitarian consensus. What happens when the body of the people come together? Can they get it right where the individual can go astray? Well, the Christian church, Christian history and tradition has an example of this in the ecumenical councils, where the bishops of the whole church gather, and they are considered to be on track because they're inspired by the Holy Spirit. When they're all together, the Holy Spirit inspires them to lead them towards truth. And that truth eventually finds its way into the canon law of the church, ecclesiastical law. And one source of the canon law, of course, is the divine law that comes from Revelation, from the Bible interpreted in tradition. But another source would come from that consensus of councils and so on. Another source, the words of the founder of the religion. Now, even within a secular framework, you get this idea that when you have a community that gathers, a political community, then if there's freedom of speech, then the truth can eventually out. Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed this with his social contract. John Stuart Mill, a famous political philosopher, wrote a book called On Liberty, and in that he talks about the free marketplace of ideas that you get in a democracy. And the truth is found between them all. Like no individual has a monopoly on truth. But when you put them all together and you allow these ideas to be exchanged and to influence each other and to jostle with each other, then the less heard view, the marginal view, holds some truth that can sort of correct the dominant view. It's an interesting idea. In other words, we need the multiplicity of views because each of them contains an element of truth and they balance each other out so that what arises from the general will of the political community is a good approximation to the truth. So this is another source of law, and we see that attempted to be embodied by our parliaments, our legislatures, because all of the members therein are representative of their electorates. So it's the people's voice, and there's a sense in which the people speaking as a collectivity will get it right. So that's a source of law. And then, of course, there is reason in the natural law tradition. You can think your way through, if you're good at that, you can think your way through to what's right and what's wrong, which is back to where you said, Belinda. Now,
my way.
Does it give you a comfort if you think your way through to what's right and what's wrong, and you're satisfied with it?
Because I know it's for real. If it's my own mind that has thought it through.
Okay, let's say you reach a principle.
Instead of just passively accepting everything, yeah.
Does it bring you any kind of comfort or confirmation to know that these other three pillars of law are confirming what you think? Let's say like the community confirms it? Or
not really, no. Because I think the community
or a religious figure confirms it? Or a holy book confirms it?
I look out there and I see the community extremely confused. So I don't set my standards by that, but I get...
What happens when your idea of what's just, and therefore what should be law, is contradicted by the law of the land? Where are you left with?
A contradiction.
What are you left to do? Is it important to follow the laws?
Well, you have to. You're forced to. Otherwise, you break the law and you get into trouble.
Is it right to break the law, you think, in certain situations?
It depends on the situation. Depends on how important it is.
How important it is to you?
Yeah, to me.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Does it
And
matter?
whether I'm willing to pay the consequences for it.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't. There's something that I personally wouldn't do. Deliberately go out to break the law. No, I wouldn't do that.
Are
But
there
I can think for myself. I know that much.
Mm-hmm.
And I can.
And you should think for yourself.
And I can come up with my own conclusions.
I mean,
Whether I apply it out there or not is another thing.
mm-hmm.
Because there are certain things you're limited, as you say, by the law.
Mm-hmm. Now, just because there is such a thing as revelation in the world, God speaking to humanity through Holy Scriptures, let's say, and just because there have been inspiring religious founders that have set precedents, and just because communities have generally agreed on customs and traditions and laws, in a lot of cases, doesn't exonerate a person from the need to think for themselves.
You have to.
Yeah,
That's why you were given a brain.
that's right.
You've got to use it.
But I'm asking you, in thinking for yourself, does it bring you any comfort, or does it strengthen you in your conviction to know that these other three posited sources of law agree with you?
At times, sometimes they may not.
And if they don't, does it give you reason to reflect? Have I got it right? Am I actually hearing the voice of my conscience aright?
Well, of course. I mean, of course you will reflect and make sure that what you're thinking is correct.
Have there been moral issues that you've tried to ponder and you've been a bit unclear on, but you've looked to a tradition and it's helped you to understand a bit better?
Never.
Never?
I've learned from my own life experiences.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I get my morality from hard lessons of life.
So,
and that's the only thing that rings true to me.
So you say that when you're in a difficult situation, you're tested, you find out what your real values are.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. That's the only thing. Somebody else can't tell me that.
Can you codify them? Can you simplify them into a list, a simple list? What are some of the main moral principles that you live by?
I mean, you find that when you're growing up, you have this eagerness and lust for life, and you throw yourself into the world, and you make a lot of mistakes, and you learn from them, and they hurt.
And when you distill that experience, what's some of the really valuable stuff that you're left with?
Oh, all kinds of stuff, Thomas. If you're willing to reflect,
mm-hmm.
you'll see that there is a reason for morality. There is a reason for it. There is a reason why you should do things in a certain way, and you shouldn't do things in a certain way.
I agree with you. I think not only is there a right and wrong in a given situation, but to do the right and to be able to consistently do the right means to understand why it's right.
But if it's done in a natural process, like what I'm saying, it's valuable. But if it's forced upon a person and they have no idea what's going on and they just do it because they're told to do it, it doesn't have much value.
I'm not talking about something being, that usually in legal systems there are penalties for non-compliance.
Yeah, but if that person doesn't agree with why they're being penalised and
do you think
has no
people
understanding of it,
should be penalised for not wearing their seatbelts? for example. That's a law, and if you break it, you get fined. Do you see what I'm saying? That there's an element of coercion.
It's a bit like you're a naughty child and we're going to smack you
In
across
every
the
legal
hands.
system.
Yeah.
A legal system has an element of coercion. There are consequences for not complying.
I think it's best to just, instead of threatening somebody, like what you just said, it's best to explain to them why it is important to wear a seatbelt.
As you do with a child when you're trying to tell them, trying to point out right from wrong.
Reason and logic.
But when a child is young, when they're really young, their reason hasn't developed yet. So you stop them from doing things that are wrong. You see parents with little children, there's that.
That's different.
A
child, you're entitled to
don't do
with.
that.
Yeah.
Mummy or daddy says, don't do that. And the kid says, the kid processes what he can do, what he can't do, what will make mum and dad upset, or what might bring a punishment or a consequence. Once the child reaches a certain age, you can reason with them and explain why something is wrong.
Yeah.
And at that age, it's really important to do the hard yards of reasoning with the child.
And I think that probably has a lot more impact as well. If they can see what could happen if they don't wear a seatbelt.
Yeah.
What's happened to other people.
So they have to develop a moral sense. They need to have good explanations.
Yeah.
So they need
It's like, I don't want that to happen to me. I totally get it. I understand it now.
Mm-hmm.
That has a different value to it.
But sometimes the different levels of authority for law are entrained in someone's consideration. Like last week, we were talking about John Rawls's veil of ignorance and trying to imagine a disembodied human being about to take birth, which is just a pure hypothetical, right? It doesn't happen like this, but imagine before you took birth, you were abstracted from every concrete situation and you didn't know whether you were going to be born rich or poor, deformed or a healthy body, whether you're going to be born female or male, with black skin, white skin, yellow skin, brown skin, and then you had to contemplate the kind of society you wanted to be born in and how the institutions would operate in that society so that you would get a fair go no matter where you ended up, right? That's a hypothetical situation. Now, then we went on and we talked about privilege and how some people, let's say...
I think that if you had an option, you would go for beautiful, rich, privileged and the whole lot. You would. Anyone would.
Yeah, but that's why John Rawls said...
And very talented.
You don't know what you're going to be. So if you want to understand a just society, you have to start by thinking the cards the cards I may draw could put me there in that beautiful place you're talking about, the bold and the beautiful, or they could put me in the sewers of Calcutta. They could put me anywhere. And I need a community that will serve me here, but it will look after me here, because I don't know what the luck of the draw is going to be. Now, a lot of people who are born to privilege, we mentioned, they look around and they say, well, we deserve this privilege. And it may just be a rationalisation. It's like, I don't want to part with any of the advantages that I've got. I need my 3 sports cars. I need my trips to Aspen and all the fancy places. And furthermore, me and the people in my group, well, we're more deserving than that other group over there.
I don't believe that.
Well, let's say a lot of people do think like that. And they think that
crazy.
We're more deserving maybe because our forebears were more deserving, or they worked harder and they made it. And their forebears didn't work as hard, they weren't as successful, and so they're suffering the disadvantages now. Maybe those people themselves are lazy sods and don't work hard. and they're saying this from their fancy holiday destination because they may have it very easy. They may be living on Easy Street, but it doesn't stop them from condemning others for their laziness, right?
They're lazy themselves, yeah.
And then if you go into it a bit deeper, this mentality can be reflective of a kind of theology or a theodicy. It becomes religious beyond a certain level because it's like, well, how come you got it and they haven't got it? Well, how come your parents had it and their parents didn't have it? Well, maybe there are some people who are chosen.
No. It's not like
maybe
that.
there are some people who are members of the elect. This is an idea that's influenced societies. It influenced the Puritans that came to America. It influenced the Jewish people, of course. It influenced lots of people. Calvinists believe in the elect. Do you know what I mean by that? I mean that there are some people that are favoured by God. So it becomes...
But are they favoured?
Cosmic.
You've got to look at the whole of their life and look at it and analyse it and ask, are they truly favoured? Like, they may have money, they may have the holidays, they may have the sports cars, but they may have cancer, or they may have lost a child. You gotta look at the whole scenario.
True.
A poor person might not have the holidays, the cars, or whatever, but they've got their family, they've got their children, are healthy. They've got a lot to be grateful for.
And as the Chinese say, there are many forms of wealth.
That's right.
And
so it's not just the material aspects.
No.
Because there's a lot of people that have the material aspects down pat, but the rest of their life is shocking. And a lot of those people end up committing suicide.
That's true. I mean, that's a good point. But
from misery.
But leaving aside, you haven't put their lives under a magnifying glass and found, well, there can be lacks in other areas that these poor people don't have a lack in. Like, they may be very preoccupied with guarding what they've got. The poor people may show greater hospitality. They may show... It's amazing just how many people living in poverty.
Parental love. Like, maybe their parents don't give it, don't show them any love.
Mm-hmm.
They're too busy holidaying, having a hoo-ha of a time, and they've never had that. Maybe a poor person might have that in their life.
Granted.
So it depends on what you're weighing up. Is it just the material, or is it material and spiritual?
Yeah. Now I give you all of that, but I just want to throw something else into the mix, and that is, have you ever come across the attitude of, we are part of the elect, of the chosen ones? We deserve to prosper in life more than this other group.
We've got it in our own family.
You can see this attitude in anybody, sure. But it's an attitude that's had amazing power in history. Like, my kind, my group, whatever it is chosen by God. So it gets to that divine or cosmic level here in terms of, we've been chosen to be favoured. We have been chosen to rule, to dominate.
So are the Kennedys, but look at the tragedy.
It comes in many forms.
Look at the tragedy, Thomas.
I know, but I don't quite think you're getting the gist of what I'm saying. I'm saying that once that idea comes in, then you have a rationalisation for inequalities.
Yeah, I know. It's like, we're better than you.
You know what I'm saying? It's like you can stop there. You don't have to do anything more. You don't have to rectify or deal with the heartache and the poverty and the injustice around you, because you've already explained it. Because I'm part of a chosen group and you're not part of a chosen group. And therefore, we come full circle and we we're dealing with justice amongst human beings, but we see that our view of the character of God is at the heart of this thing as well. Our view of the character of God. Does God want to make some people above other people? Does God want some people to be favoured and others not? Does God want some people to be saved and others damned? Does God want, some people to be successful and others to fail? Is that the nature of God? And
I'm not sure.
Right. Is it relevant to our thoughts about justice? I think it probably is. And I've explained in a previous video why I think that might be the case. And there's that whole area, as I say, of theodicy, which is the study of how we can reconcile the ways of providence with all the suffering in the world. How can we justify that God is a just God in the light of all the evil and the suffering in the world? And people who succeed in making such a reconciliation, I think, have a strength and a foundation in their character, in their life, and they can flourish with that. And if you don't, it's like a big wound that you will carry through life and despair.
And it's more likely going to happen to the disadvantaged than the so-called advantage. They're the ones that will delve in deep
Because
to try and find out whether they live in a just world or they don't.
Yeah. Well, just imagine if you can't make that reconciliation, then it's like, well, then there is no God, and then there's no rhyme or reason to suffering,
isn't it?
Yeah, it's all connected. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Right.
I haven't done a very good job of it, but it's all connected.
No.
Then there's no rhyme or reason to suffering, and therefore we can just expect suffering at any time, evil at any time, chaos and evil greatly. Kind of dominate in this cosmos.
Yeah, I know, and to try and get your head around it is really hard.
Well, Belinda, we've come to the end of our discussion of justice, and I hope that we've stimulated some good thinking around justice and related ideas.